My name is Pamela Koulianos. I'm with North Carolina State University. The Petra Garden and Pool Complex, henceforth PGPC, project seeks to document the archaeological record of the garden and pool and interpret its function and role in relation to other monumental structures within Petra's city center. 8 previous field seasons and ongoing field work carried out from 1995 to 2013 included survey and excavation of this site, and the ceramic material from these seasons have been studied preliminarily by the present ceramicist. The Pool and Garden Complex sits immediately to the east of the Great Temple and directly below the hilltop domestic structures of Izantur. The purpose of this analysis was to test chronological phases that Badal has assigned. The chronological phases are as follows. This paper will focus on analysis of material from specific trenches that addresses the proposed dates of several of these phases. It must be stressed that this analysis is based on a large sample of excavated pottery from the project, in toto, a corpus of 16,698. The pre-garden occupation, phase 1. In Trench 13, ceramic material recovered from a pit underlies the Phase 2 leveling debris and the layer of garden soil associated with the monumental garden of the Nabatean period. This is also supported by numismatic evidence in the form of a coin of syllabus dated to 9 BC that was found with the cache of pottery, providing a terminus postquem for the stratum covering the cache. The Phase 2 leveling debris and the earliest garden soil. These vessels were largely intact and included a variety of vessels: cooking pots, jugs, jars, and bowls. Cooking pot, hereafter referred to as CP, type 1, is shown here, and has a characteristically flattened rim, sometimes with the rim pulled out over the exterior. These 1st century BC CPs, as well as transitional CP type 1, type 2 rims, suggest a smooth transition from the late 1st century BC form into the typical triangular rim tradition of the 1st century AD. The type 2 CP would continue to be the most prominent form for the next 2 centuries. Other complete vessels recovered from the pottery pit that date to the late 1st century BC are bowl types 1 through 3 and type 6. Although these forms, especially the type 1 carinated bowl, extend from the late 1st century BC up until the early 3rd century AD, those recovered from the pit are likely the early examples based on the quality in wear and manufacture. The later variants of these types are thicker, coarser, and debased. As far as the author and the excavator know, there are no other examples of a single-phase cache of pottery of a variety of forms, coarse ware, Nabatean painted and unpainted fineware, from this early period. The Roman renovations, phase 3. Of the analyzed pottery, evidence for a 2nd century reconstruction phase can be found from contexts in Trench 5, southern platform, and Trench 12, western, etc. The latest material recovered from Trench 5, Locus 149, and Trench 5, Locus 158, were 5 Nabatean painted fineware, henceforth NPFW, Dekorphase 3C sherds, around AD 100 to 150, and a possible Dekorphase 4 incurved bowl, 2nd through 4th century. Trench 12, Locus 1, Pale 12001, had 37 total sherds. These included 3 NPFW, Dekorphase 3A, around 20 to 70, body sherds, and 1 type 2 CP rim, 1st century AD to 3rd century. 1 late Roman closed form painted cup, 2nd through 4th century, 1 late NPFW 3C body sherd, and 7 NPFW 3C body sherds, both from Trench 12, Locus 45. Although the evidence of this Roman renovation phase is limited from the sample of pottery analyzed, the pottery from this particular pale provides a terminus postquem of the early to 1st century AD. Roman renovations were common throughout the city center of Petra after the annexation of AD 106, not only at the Pool and Garden Complex, but the Great Temple and the main theater. The small temple was also built in this period. Badal credits the construction of the vaulted bridge to provide easier access to the island pavilion. In Phase 2, the island pavilion can only be reached by swimming, by boat, or perhaps an earlier wooden bridge construction. And reconfiguration of the hydraulic system to the early 2nd century. The second destruction, Phase 7. This destruction is thought to be associated with the destruction at the end of the 6th or early 7th century AD. It is perhaps the same that caused the destruction of the Petra church. Only 6 pails of pottery from Trench 2, the central platform area, are associated with a second destruction context. 2 from Locus 5 and 4 from Locus 9. Because of the small number of pails, the contents of each can be discussed here in order to determine if there are any sherds that can support a 6th century destruction date. The 2 pottery pails from Locus 5 yielded altogether 2 Type 5 CP rims. This Type 5 CP rim tradition begins in the early late Roman period, yet seems to extend well into the Byzantine periods. It is likely that this is a later, most likely Byzantine, example given the sherds of which it is associated. There is only one early Byzantine, circa 324 to 500, casserole rim and handle, and one Type 6 early Byzantine CP rim, Type 10 rounded rim at Isla. Additionally, Locus 5 yielded a late Roman, possibly 3rd to 4th century, Type 4 bowl with a rounded rim and a single groove under the rim, as well as a Class 48 amphora rim. 3rd to 4th centuries. Notably, Trench 2, Locus 5, Pail 2050 yielded one Isla body sherd, unusually thick and ribbed. This could be a sherd of an Isla amphora, 5th to 7th centuries AD, but it also could be from a large Isla storage jar. If indeed from an Isla amphora, this would provide a terminus postquem of circa AD 400 for this second destruction layer. Locus 9 yielded 2 Islaware body sherds, which could be sherds of an Isla amphora. Besides the Islaware body sherds, one Type 5 CP rim, one Type 7 CP rim, and one Type 3 folded rim jar was recovered. The pottery from these 2 loci are mostly early Byzantine in date, with a few residual early Roman/Nabatean and late Roman sherds. However, most of the late Roman sherds are forms that extend from the LR periods to the early Byzantine periods. Most of the early Byzantine sherds are forms that extend into later periods. However, there is no fineware or amphory that suggest or confirm a date later than the 5th century AD associated with these pails. If the Islaware body sherds are indeed Isla amphory, then this extends the chronological range for these loci into the 5th century AD. Currently, because the latest ceramic evidence does not support a late 6th or early 7th century destruction date, perhaps it is possible that the destruction that the PGPC experienced was the earthquake of AD 419. The latest datable pottery from the pottery analyzed, with the exception of post-classical sherds found, dates to the late 4th century. Yet, the excavation yielded a variety of late Roman redwares, and among those African red slip, Cypriot red slip, and Phocaean red slip. The ARS forms range from Form 6 to Form 104, which range in date from the early 2nd century to the late 6th century AD. There are 2 CRS forms, Form 1, late 4th century AD, and Form 9A, 550 to 600 AD. Noteworthy is a handful of PRS rims that represent a variety of types of Form 3 ranging in date to the early 6th century. The context of these sherds were wash or fill. However, these finewares indicate importation to Petra of these finewares well into the late 6th and perhaps even early 7th centuries. Now that I have presented the evidence to test chronological phases, I will now discuss the coarse wares present at the PGP site generally. Courseware bowls, jars, and jugs, and cooking wares were predominant. There were a handful of nearly complete Nabatean lamps, including this complete lamp from the 2013 season. There were few fragments of imported finewares, numerous Nabatean fineware, and Nabatean semi-fineware, sherds, bricks, tiles, pipes, and amphory in the corpus. Of the courseware vessels, the presence of cooking wares was the most common, ranging in types that date from the 1st century BC to the 4th century AD. Noteworthy is the presence of CP Type 1, the predecessor of the most common type CP from Petra, CP Type 2. CP Type 2, the triangular rim, is dated to the 1st century AD and is a type that continues well into the LR periods. CP Type 1 has been found in mixed contexts throughout the project. However, it was recovered from the foundation trench, Trench 13. Complete vessels of CP Type 1 are displayed here. From Trench 13, Locus 18, Pale 13029, a context which has been dated by the ceramicist to a transitional Nabatean to early Roman period, contains 7 of these Type 1 CP rims, as well as 2 late Type 1 CP rims that show a transition from the flattened rim typical of the Type 1 into the triangular rim tradition, which is characteristic of Type 2. This may suggest an end to the production of the Type 1 CP by the late 1st century BC and the introduction of CP Type 2 into the archaeological record. Curiously, some of the cookingware vessels are uncharred and are most likely not used for cooking purposes. The question then arises as to their function. The best possible explanations of use are transport, storage, or dining, as observed and noted in the 2011 ceramic final report. Cooking pots are multifunctional vessels, and at other sites, such as Khirbet Shema, cooking pots were recovered from within a cistern, as well as their 2 twin vertical loop handles were ideal for attaching ropes to draw water from such installations. Uncharred, complete, and broken cooking pots suggest that these cooking pots were used to retrieve water from this cistern. Once broken, the pots would be left inside the cistern. Given the nature of the PGPC site, the uncharred cooking pots could have been used for this very same purpose, retrieving water from cisterns to water plants, removing polluted water from the pool, or filling the pool with fresh water. Notably, the material analyzed yielded a handful of flower pot sherds. The flower pot has a string-cut base, sometimes with a ring base, with an intentional hole punched through the base. String-cut bases are typical of a later Roman fashion, but this kind of base is attested in early Roman/Nabatean periods. The flower pots in this slide appeared occasionally in the 2011 and 2013 seasons. The dearth of amphorae was observed in the 2011 corpus, from which there were only 2 definitive types: a Class 53 Egyptian amphora rim of the 4th to mid-6th century from Trench 24, and a Class 47 hollow foot amphora handle from the 3rd to 4th centuries from Trench Pool Southwest. A large reconstructible jar body sherd recovered from the 2011 season of over-fired Aqaba ware with a characteristic green color has been identified as an Isla amphora and was confirmed by Thomas Parker. However, because it is not a diagnostic sherd, this will remain only a suggestion. The almost complete absence of Gaza amphorae in the complex is significant. Displayed on this slide is the number of amphorae from the analyzed material. Following this table are other diagnostic amphora sherds. Given Petra's location, the rarity of Gaza amphorae at the site seems odd. The Petra-Gaza road remained in use well into the 3rd century. In addition to that, the lack of Isla amphorae, while later in date, is still surprising since it is attested at Ezantur. Although the garden likely consumed the contexts of amphorae, the vessels themselves may not have been stored at the site but possibly decanted elsewhere. Perhaps a dump that has yet to be discovered may yield discarded amphorae. Finally, it is interesting when comparing the percentage of amphorae at PGPC to other Nabatean and Roman sites such as Isla. One would expect a greater difference. It is likely that a port site, such as Isla, would yield a greater number of amphorae rather than an inland site, such as Petra. The excavated material of the PGPC yielded circa 1% of amphorae of the overall pottery. What is most surprising is the quantitative similarity in the percentage of amphorae recovered from Isla when compared to PGPC. However, the Roman Aqaba project could not excavate shore or harbor areas. One would expect to find the greatest quantity of discarded amphorae in such areas. This could bias the quantity of amphorae at Isla. Despite this caveat, it is surprising still that the percentage of amphorae at Isla, circa 1%, of nearly 650,000 sherds is similar to the percentage at PGPC. Imported fine wares from the ceramic collection are limited, yet represent a wide variety. This table shows the number of various fine wares attested in the ceramic corpus. The CRS, PRS, and ARS wares are the latest datable sherds recovered from PGPC, of which may also support Badal's suggested second destruction in the late 6th century. Nabatean painted fineware, unpainted fineware, and semi-fine wares are abundant throughout from all periods. This table shows a breakdown of the NPFW by Dekorphase. Dekorphase 2B, 3A, and 3C represent the most popular of the NPFW phases attested at PGPC. The abundance of this pottery in Dekorphase 2B and 3A are not at all surprising given the presumed date of the construction and initial use to the late 1st century BC to the 1st century AD. Dekorphase 2B also represents the latest datable painted fineware from contexts under the garden soil and from the foundation trench for the pool facade wall. Noteworthy are two Dekorphase 1, 150 BC to 50 BC, sherds. Both of these sherds come from Trench 6, or the southeast corner of the north building, which includes a level below the garden with one cesspit. The appearance of NPFW Dekorphase 1 could suggest activity on the site during the 1st century BC. However, these sherds could come from elsewhere in a later period, especially given the topography of the site and the context from which they came. Finally, the abundance of Dekorphase 3C sherds show that the site was being used either for its original function as a paradisios or later as an agricultural area into the mid-2nd century. One final point. If the 4th century layers are truly so rich with pottery, why would there be so few Dekorphase 4 sherds? Could this not be explained by the fact that there was a decline in the production of NPFW by this period? The table on the screen displays the percentage of NPFW of the total ceramic material analyzed. Notice that the most of the other Dekorphases of NPFW represent a higher percentage than Dekorphase 4. The typical Nabatean unguentarium falls loosely into the fineware category, yet it is a unique vessel and should be discussed separately. From the analyzed pottery, there is a total of 79 examples of unguentaria. Displayed on the screen is the quantification of unguentaria by diagnostic feature. One complete example was classified as a Johnson Type 1 of Group 1, pre-AD 27. Another example has been classified as Johnson Type 5 from Group 2, and finally a nearly complete profile of a Type 3 from Group 1. Of the other examples, one base was described as a, quote, late Roman flat base, probably string cut, sloppy but distinct ribbing, could be residual of Group 1 or 2 when compared to Johnson's typology. Out of the nearly 17,000 sherds that have been processed, unguentaria represent only 0.47%. It would seem that applying scented oils after swimming was not a common practice. However, it would be interesting to see the quantities of unguentaria at baths to compare. Perhaps it can be assumed that the unguentarium was not a typical vessel used at the garden site. The decline of the perfume industry and the disappearance of unguentaria from the archaeological record after the 3rd century AD could suggest that incense was no longer being transshipped in quantity through Petra. Churches are attested at Petra from the late 4th century onwards, and both pagans and Christians used incense in religious ceremonies. So it is unlikely that the importation of incense ceased. Rather, the demand for incense in Petra shifted from importation to supply a perfume industry for export to mere local consumption. Given the shift of trade routes to the south, it is likely that the incense was imported through ports along the Red Sea, such as Isla, and now bypassed Petra. Perhaps the incense containers were skins or other organic materials which do not survive in the archaeological record. Carbonized palm leaf bags are attested at Kana, and within it, frankincense, Perhaps these same bags were shipped to Isla. I am grateful to Russell Gentry for this information. Among miscellaneous finds from the PGPC 2011 season, a body shirt of a polycandylon was recovered. The complete two-tier polycandylon shown here was recovered from the Exedra in front of Qasr al-Bint and is dated by the excavators to the 2nd or possibly 3rd century AD. In conclusion, the dates assigned to stratigraphic and architectural phases of the garden are to some extent supported by the associated pottery. The pottery supports a late 1st century BC date as the construction phase of the complex. Again, this is also supported by numismatic evidence. As for the Roman renovation, the only pottery available from a single context provides a terminus postquem of the 1st century AD. The limited pottery associated with the 2nd destruction phase provides a terminus postquem of circa 400. From the 3rd century, the pool and garden complex was no longer functioning as a paradisios, but instead was being used as agricultural land. Although the pottery analyzed from this sample cannot support a date of the 2nd century, or 2nd destruction, as late as post 597, it does provide a terminus postquem. Activity likely continued in the complex at least until the 5th century. The only evidence to support a mid to late 6th century date comes from the CRS, ARS, and PRS late Roman redware sherds. But as discussed earlier, all of those analyzed to date derive from post-destruction contexts. Geological evidence or numismatic evidence may aid in dating this 2nd destruction layer. Further analysis of the still unexamined ceramic material and pottery from future seasons will help to shape a more accurate chronology of the complex and illuminate change in use over time. I would like to thank Leanne Badal for providing me with an opportunity to study her ceramic material, Yvonne Gerber for hosting the Amman conference and inviting me to share this information, and ASOR for inviting me to share this information that I've presented here today. And finally, Thomas Parker, my advisor, who has trained me as a ceramicist. Thank you.